Hello, my name is Rinon, and today we are going to talk a little bit more in depth about how you can more efficiently deal damage as a White Mage. There's a really massive disparity between the average healer in Party Finder and then the higher level healers that are getting good passes, and I think that difference is larger than any other role in the game by a country mile. And honestly, I think we can shrink it a little bit as a community by making sure that players understand how to maximize their job and work together as a group a little bit better. Healers need to DPS. It's a part of their job role and one that some healers massively underappreciate. And I really hope that some of the things in this video will give budding White Mages a little bit of a better understanding of how to do higher damage with their kit. If you're interested in this kind of Final Fantasy XIV content, I'd absolutely love it if you'd subscribe. That would massively help me out. I've got a lot more videos coming in the future that are going to cover the other healers and specific fights and things like that. Okay, so let's get into it. The first thing I wanted to cover with you guys are the general damage rules for White Mage. White Mage only has a couple of damaging skills in their kit. The first one is their dot, Dia, then their filler damage skill, which is called Glare. They have their off global cooldown, damage dealing and healing hybrid, Assize, their heavy hitter, Afflatus Misery, their AoE skill, which is Holy, and the last part of their damage kit is their damage steroid, Presence of Mind. Because of this, the general rules to deal damage on White Mage are exceptionally simple. You keep your dot Dia ticking on the boss at all times unless the boss is about to leave. You press Assize on cooldown as a matter of the greatest priority whenever it's available. You build up your Misery and you hit it under raid buff for maximum damage. You use Presence of Mind when you can DPS, and preferably you use it under raid buffs to get the most from it. And aside from that, you press the Glare button a lot. When there are 3 or more targets, Holy becomes your primary damage skill. So when we put that together into an opener, this is what you're going to see the White Mage opener looks like. You're going to precast your pot when you see that 4 seconds just after it pop up pre-pull, and then at 2.5 seconds before the pull, you're going to glare into your dot, into Assize and Presence of Mind double weaved in the off globals, and then you're going to spam that glare button. Once you've done that, you're going to refresh Dia when it's about to drop off, and you're going to keep pressing glare as much as humanly possible. When Assize comes off cooldown, you press it. And one thing to note is that every second Assize can easily be weaved into your Dia, which makes life very easy. And then you're going to use your Afflatus stacks to build up a Misery, and you're going to pop that Misery depending on the healing and movement requirements of the fight. It seems pretty simple, right? And it is. Now here's the but. There are a couple of big things that foil White Mage's comfy life of doing consistently heavy hits. The first of which is making sure that you're keeping your GCD rolling constantly when the boss is targetable, and that's definitely more difficult than it sounds as a caster. So let's talk about how to play your GCD. Like most classes in Final Fantasy XIV, it's imperative that you constantly roll your GCD on White Mage. Once you press one spell, you should immediately be hitting the key of the next spell to ensure that it casts instantly once your current one is over. Your goal is to have as much casting uptime as is possible based on the constraints of the fight. If the boss is targetable, you should be casting. If you need to do healing GCDs, that's absolutely fine, they just replace a glare. And if you need to do instant off global GCD healing, such as Benediction or Tetra, you should aim to weave them in with your instants, which is in this case Dia, Regen or your Afflatus abilities. This allows you to minimize clipping to only the absolute essentials. And what I mean by essentials in this case is that if you don't, somebody is going to die within the next few seconds. Those are the only times you should be clipping. One thing to consider though is that there are 1 or 2 cases on White Mage specifically where it's okay to clip and isn't really a damage loss. What I'm talking about here is Assize. Assize is an ability that you should be pressing immediately when it comes off cooldown as your highest priority, and sometimes it can become available at an awkward time. Assize has a 45-second cooldown, which means every second Assize lines up perfectly with you refreshing your dot Dia. The Assizes in between, however, can become a little bit problematic. If you don't have a planned weave at that point or something that you actually need to weave with, aka if the raid is taking no damage at that point and the tank is not taking enough damage to constitute you using a regen, it's usually the best course of action to just clip the Assize. Like so, you see me going glare into Assize into glare. For those Assizes that line up with Dia though, avoid clipping at all costs. The next key point is to ensure that you're taking advantage of the key raid buffs in your group and landing your heavy hits such as Misery within them. As a White Mage, the raid buffs that are applicable to you are Trick Attack from the Ninja, Technical Step from the Dancer, Change Stratagem from the Scholar, Devotion from the Summoner, Divination from the Astro, Battle Voice from the Bard, and Battle Litany from the Dragoon. All of those are on either a 60-second cooldown, a 120 or a 180. You want to do your best to make sure that you're doing as much damage as possible whenever those skills are active. Most classes have reopeners at certain times in the fight where they will completely burst once again as if it were the beginning of the fight again. As an example, with the Scholar, Dissipation comes back at the 3-minute mark for a small burst, but at the 6-minute mark you get both Chain and Dissipation back together, as well as enough Aetherflow stacks so that you can do 6 Aetherflow stacks, you can do a reopener, you can use your pot and everything. For White Mage, the ideal reopener would be to have Presence of Mind, Potion, an Assize and a stockpiled Afflatus Misery all together within as many raid buffs as possible, but this can be a little bit more difficult to realise than you'd expect, and that is because of Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind is a bit of a weird one compared to most buffs in this game, because instead of it being on a minute mark, it's on a 2-minute 30-second cooldown, which means it doesn't line up properly with the majority of group raid buffs in the game. Most of the raid buffs are going to come up at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 6 minutes, etc, etc, but the problem with Presence of Mind is it comes back at 2:30, 5, 7:30 and 10. Generally that's okay and you just learn to deal with it, but once you've cleared a fight and you have an idea of your group's kill time, you can then have some fun with it and try and fit it under raid buffs. As an example, say my group kills Ramu Savage at around 7 minutes 20 seconds. Presence of Mind comes back at 2:35 and 7 minutes 30, but because we kill the time before 7:45, the last Presence of Mind is generally useless. It comes up at 7:30. I might get like half of the duration, it's not worth it. As a result, I know for a fact that after my opener I have access to 2 Presence of Minds, and that means that I can hold them on to the best moments that will gain me damage. So instead of using it at 2:30 when it comes up during Thunderstorm, I hold the second Presence of Mind until after Thunderstorm and use it at the 3-minute mark to line up with all of the 3-minute raid buffs. This gives me much more value than I would have gotten beforehand. Then the next Presence of Mind would come back up at 5 minutes and 30 seconds, but again, I'll hold on to it. The magic 6-minute mark reopener for the majority of classes is coming up soon, so I hold it for 30 seconds, pop my potion, watch those raid buffs go up, and use everything. If you're able to do this consistently, you're going to see your damage skyrocket. The next thing I want to talk about is movement, because White Mage struggles massively with movement compared to the other 2 healers. Astro can move very easily with Malefic, and Scholar can use Energy Drain and Ruin 2 to move consistently, but when you think about it, White Mage is really limited in their free movement tools. The only free things we have are Swiftcast and Dia only comes up every 30 seconds. As a result, one of the biggest struggles you'll have as a White Mage is planning how to get around the fight's mechanics without having to run around a lot. Your aim is to weigh up the pros and cons of all of your movement tools and apply the right ones to every mechanic. It's like a little puzzle. You can utilize Afflatus Lily skills for movement if you wish, it's definitely better than casting nothing, and you can also use the movement as a chance to put a regen on the tank to give them more longevity to auto attacks, but only if you actually need that healing, because the cost of each of these is losing you a glare. So in an ideal world, one thing you want to learn and apply consistently as a caster in this game is how to slide cast. Almost every fight in this game has mechanics happening regularly that require you to move or be pre-positioned in a certain spot, and for a job that struggles to find free movement like White Mage, you want to learn to slide cast to allow you to get into position early and let that act as your primary movement tool when you've got a lot of time to get to your location. This lets you save your movement tools for when you need to move into multiple places one after another very quickly. If you watch here, you can see that near the end of the glare cast, when there's around 0.75 to 0.5 of a second left of the cast, I'm moving a little bit and then I stop as the cast completes. That's what slide casting is, and it allows you to abuse the game's latency to make small movements during casts at absolutely no uptime lost if you do it correctly. I'd advise practicing this whenever you can, in roulettes, on a dummy, whatever, and get as consistent with it as you can because it will help you a ton. The next thing is to make the most of your Misery, because while it feels amazing to hit 100k plus Misery crits, this skill is definitely overvalued by the FF14 community. White Mage's goal, not to build up a Misery every 90 seconds and then use it. If you do that, it ends up as a pretty big damage loss and it can give you wasted heals on a regular basis. So let's break this down for a second, right? Misery costs 4 GCDs to use, the 3 GCDs from using Afflatus skills to build it up, and then the 1 GCD for using Misery itself. You get 900 potency for those 4 GCDs. However, if you use 4 glares instead, that's 1200 potency, which is a pretty big 300 potency difference. That might make you think, what's the point in using Misery then? And so, I'm going to tell you what the point in using Misery is. The first setting in which you want to use your Afflatus skills is when there are multiple targets. Misery becomes a massive DPS gain on 2 targets, so you want to prioritize it if there are multiple enemies targetable. The second one is raid buffs. The damage increases that you get under buffs such as Trick Attack, Devotion and Divination can shoot the damage of Misery up to an insane degree. If you check the difference here between the damage that one of my Miseries does with raid buffs and without raid buffs, you're going to see that it's an incredibly large disparity. So building up your 3 lilies outside of raid buffs and then hitting the Misery crit under raid buffs can definitely make it worthwhile if you make sure to stack the buffs properly. The third one is healing. Because let's be real, sometimes you just gotta heal. If you're going to be healing anyway, you might as well prioritize your Afflatus skills, so at least you're building towards a Misery, which minimizes the DPS loss for that healing. One thing I do want to know is that if you're still progging through a fight, it's a good idea to keep your lilies and use Misery regularly, because you don't know what's coming next, so you just want to be careful. Now, let's talk White Mage in dungeons, because in AoE situations, White Mage's damage priorities can change a lot. On 1 or 2 targets, you're still going to be wanting to dear both of the targets and then spam glare on whichever one you fancy, to be honest. Of course, you want to make sure that you focus on whichever one has raid debuffs on them at the time, if one of them does. But often, dungeons throw 5, 10, sometimes even more enemies at you all at once. In these situations, you want to swap over to holying the ads and doing your best to line Presence of Mind up with pulling the mob packs. Being able to spam Presence of Mind holies on 10 plus enemies is such a larger DPS gain than saving it for a boss, and it's definitely going to shave a noticeable amount of time off of your group's dungeon runs. Also, want to prioritize using Misery a lot more than you would in a raid duty. The strength of that AoE far outweighs the cost of preparing it in a setting with multiple enemies, and the greatest boon of Misery is that you can burn the lilies to prepare for a Misery in between trash packs at 0 DPS loss. So here is generally what I do in dungeon. I pre-pull regen the tank, I give him Benison. As we're moving to position, pulling the mobs one by one, I put Dia on as many mobs as possible to get them ticking. As soon as the positioning is about to complete and the pack is about to stay still, I Dia into Swiftcast, Holy in the middle of the trash pack. That will stun all of the enemies and stop them attacking. Then I will weave in Presence of Mind and Thin Air if I have them, and spam the fuck out of Holy. If Misery's up, now's a good time to use that as well. The stun from the Holy is so amazing because it allows you to keep DPSing even longer, it allows the tank to stay topped even longer, and if the DPS in the group are proficient, often the tank can avoid needing heals altogether in trash packs. If he does need healing though, prioritize things like Tetra and Benediction to make sure that you can spam Holy more. Okay, so I hope that some of these tips were useful. You may have some damage optimizations for White Mage of your own that you'd like to contribute. If so, please, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Next week I'm going to be giving more in-depth healing tips for some of the ultimate encounters in Final Fantasy XIV. So if you're interested to see that, I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Thank you very much for watching and have an absolutely wonderful day.